We've just fixed the clutch slave cylinder leak on this 1983 280 SL, and the next thing to do is to fix the water pump leak, which I've been putting off because I imagine it's quite involved, taking a whole load of bits off the car. But anyway, it's a nice Sunday and I'm going to see how far I get. I guess the very first thing to do is drain the coolant out, and you can do that in one of two ways. You can undo the drain plug at the bottom of the radiator, or I'm actually going to do it the slightly easier way and just undo the hose here. You can also, to make your life slightly easier, is to drive the front of the car up on ramps, and to help to get the air out of the radiator system when you've finished, and also helps you back a little bit as well. But we don't have that luxury, so we're just going to do it as is. So the first thing we're going to do is take a 10mm open spanner and undo all of these little 10mm bolts here. Those 4 little bolts don't have a washer, they just look like that, those 4 little 10mm bolts. If you've got those 4 bolts out, you should be able to lift this whole assembly out like so. So this is the fan here, fan assembly. What we're going to do is we're just going to go one step further and disassemble this, take these 4 bolts here out, and then just clean all of this up. We'll do that off camera. We're going to take this plastic radiator shroud on, and I believe it's just held on by these 2 little nuts here, and then one on either side, and this kind of wiggles and pulls up. Not the right nut holding that on, but this particular one has 3 washers on. Don't lose the washers. Once you've got that fan out and you've undone the 2 bolts at the top, you should be able to maneuver this out. It does take a bit of wiggling, but it is possible to get this out. Like so. What you're supposed to do next is loosen the belt, but you might find that this actually just comes straight off like that, and it allows you to do that. Okay, let's have a quick look at that. This would be a good time to clean this up and maybe paint it. And that there is the water pump held on by these little bolts. So we just need to drain the coolant out now and see if we can get that water pump off. The bottom bolt is often a real difficult one to get off, because I think you might have to take this, I think that's the harmonic balancer, off by taking those Allen bolts out. However, there may be a notch in there that allows us to do all of that without taking the harmonic balancer off. We'll soon see. Jack the car up a little bit to be able to get that coolant out. Probably should not have it routed over the horn like that. Not to worry. That coolant does come out at quite a speed when you undo that lower hose, so make sure that you've got the bucket right underneath it, otherwise it will go all over your garage floor. So this water pump is held on by a series of these 10mm bolts, and if you're very lucky you'll be able to get them out without snapping and shearing them off. You will think you're doing really well until you get to the bottom one, which is hidden behind this. I think this is called the harmonic balancer here, and I think we're going to have to take that off by removing the Allen bolts here, and this whole thing comes off, I believe. Now this next bit is important advice. These are 6mm Allen head bolts, and before you go along and get your 6mm bit, I seriously advise that you clean out each Allen head bolt head thoroughly to make sure the bit goes all the way in, because you do not want to be rounding off those heads. If you round off those heads, oh my goodness me, you will be into such a world of pain to get those bolts out. So make sure that the Allen key or whatever you put in there goes in all the way. I knew there was a reason why I had been putting off this job of changing this water pump, basically to change the water pump you need to take off this harmonic balancer, and to do that you need to undo these hex bolts, 6mm Allen head bolts here, but those bolts do not want to come off, and it feels like I'm either going to round those bolts off or I'm going to snap them off, which would be a disaster. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a go at taking out this radiator here and seeing if I can use an impact wrench to get those hex head bolts out, because the benefit of an impact wrench is that sort of vibration and knocking is more likely to get those out, and if we do snap them off we're going to have to drill them out, in which case we're going to have to take the radiator out anyway so we can have access through the front here. So to get the radiator out we've got 3 hoses to undo, this one here, and the one at the bottom, which of course we've just finished putting back on, and then actually 4 hoses, this one here as well. And then we've got to undo these 2 oil cooler lines, and as soon as we undo those lines are going to be leaking oil until we finish the job. Now once we've undone all of those hoses and these lines here, the radiator's held in with 2 clips at the side here, if you can see that here, and what you have to do is basically push those clips down with your thumb, get your thumb in there, push it down, and then the bottom bit will unhook like so, and then you should be able to twist and pull that out. They're pretty rusty and manky, these clips, so while we're at it we'll probably tidy those up and repaint them. So let's get to it. This is a little 6mm screw or nut, and this should just pull off like so. Tuck that under there for good measure. Next up we're going to undo this one here. Once you've undone that you should just be able to twist this off. We've already drained the radiator through that bottom hose, so I'm not expecting huge amounts of coolant to come out. We've got all the rubber hoses off. Had a whole load more coolant come out the radiator, obviously, because when we undid this you've got a bit more pressure in there, but never mind. Next up we've got to take the oil lines off. It's really important when you're undoing this that you get hold of a 22mm spanner and hold onto this nut here, and you get your 27mm spanner and undo this one. Don't just undo that one, you may well end up twisting that fitting off the radiator, and then you'll be up for a whole new radiator, which is a right old pain. Okay, here goes nothing. I'm going to hold on to the bottom nut with the 22, use the 27. Doesn't seem to be on there particularly tight. No idea what happened while we undo this. No doubt I'm expecting a whole load of oil to come out. We'll soon find out. Okay. So there we go, that's what happens. You do indeed get a whole load of oil leaking out of there. What to do now is undo this clip, and we should be able to lift that radiator out. You just need to push it down. Difficult to get your hand in there. There goes the nail. Okay, well, it is coming out slowly but surely. So there you have it. That's how you get the radiator out in SL. Now I'm hoping that having got the radiator out, I'm going to be able to get an impact wrench on these things here to undo them without stripping them. Let's give that a go, and you can have a good laugh if it doesn't work. Okay, one down. Whoa, those are super duper long bolts. And you can see that those bolts are pretty rusty. The way I got this bolt out in the end actually was I gave it a quick blast on the reverse, if you know what I mean, as if I was putting it in rather than just trying to take it out. These bolts also have a washer on them, so make sure you don't lose that. Just going to make sure that is in all the way. It's really counterintuitive to do so, but if you're struggling to get one of these bolts out with an impact wrench, set the impact wrench to forward and just hit it with a few blasts going one way, and that might just break the rust. Last of those bolts out without stripping or snapping any of them. What you should do obviously is have taken the belts off, which I haven't done yet. Even once you've undone the bolts holding that on, it is still a real bugger to get off usually, excuse my French. And see, let's just tap it with a rubber mallet and you'll find that it should eventually come off. There you go, like so. Bearing in mind that this has got the top dead center marks on it, I'm just going to mark on here exactly which way we took it off. Once you've got that harmonic balance on, it should in theory be that easy just to get all of these out. When you take that bottom bolt out, bear in mind that a whole load of coolant is going to come flooding out of there. Once you've got all those bolts out, in theory that should just come off. There we go. Well, that's the water pump. Strangely enough, it does not seem to have any gasket on there, which is a bit odd. I suspect that's where it's leaking from, but we may never know. Before we put the new water pump on, you could swap out these bolts for stainless steel bolts. We're going to use the same bolts, but we're going to clean them up just with a wire wheel on a drill so they come out a little bit shinier, and then we'll put some kind of anti-seize. I don't know what we'll do in there, maybe a bit of grease. I'm not quite sure yet, but before we put those back in. Yeah, that's the water pump bolts. They all look an awful lot better when that water pump is ready to go. We'll be putting on this Feby water pump. Now it does come with a cardboard gasket, and that gasket only fits on one way with this groove here. Similarly, the water pump only fits on one way as well because of that groove. And that there is Feby part number 01356. They're not expensive. I think they're about £26, and I'll leave a link at the end of the video to where we got that. I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of silicone on each one of these bolts before we put the water pump back on. Now I don't have the torque spec to hand on these bolts, but you are screwing into aluminium, and it's very easy to snap these bolts and shear them off. So I would tighten them up, but not over tighten them, and obviously tighten in a crisscross pattern. The only one that's difficult to get to at a later date is the bottom one. So if you're in any doubt, make that one slightly tighter than the others. The other thing I'd mention is this gasket. I haven't put any gasket sealer on there. There wasn't any mention of it, but some people like to put their own kind of gasket sealers, etc. on there. I haven't done so on this particular occasion. If it leaks, it leaks. We'll have to do the job again, but normally with those cardboard gaskets, I don't bother putting anything on. Just before you put the harmonic balancer on, you could set about derusting it. You could actually put the whole thing in a rust bath. It would come out really nicely, but I'm not looking for a restoration here. I'm looking to get the job done before the rain starts, so I'm not going to bother doing that. You could go around, get off all the surface rust and just paint it. As I say, I'm not going to bother doing that on this occasion. These bolts here, we're going to tidy them up as best we can on a wire wheel, but possibly with the benefit of hindsight, you might just want to order another set of those for Mercedes. I'm sure they are not that expensive. These aren't perfect, but they are a lot better than they are. We'll just put some lube on there and get that harmonic balancer back on. Now, just before I put that harmonic balancer back on, I'm just putting a little dab of oil, just engine oil from the oil cooler pipes on the end of on the end of one of these bolts, like so. And I'm just going to wind that in because these bolts were really tight coming out, and I just want to make sure that the next person who does this job, which could well be me, is able to get these bolts out without having to take the radiator out. That is my plan. Now there may be easier and better ways to do this, but rather than getting involved in tensioning or slacking the belt, I've just put the whole harmonic balancer on with the belt, and that seems to have worked okay so far. All these holes line up. It really does help if you pre-lube the holes. Once again, I don't have the torque spec of these hex head bolts to hand, but I'm just going to tighten them tight by hand, and then we can always look at the torque specs later if we need to, and then torque them up to spec. Once again, tighten them in a crisscross pattern. Normally, if I was restoring this car, I'd give this the full treatment, put it in the rust bath, prime it and paint it, but in actual fact I need to use this car tomorrow, so I need to get it back together. Once again, I'm going to do the lazy way of getting this belt on. Rather than tensioning any of the belts, I am just going to put the belt on straight like this. It normally works, and then we'll know that the belt was the same tension as when we took it off. Radiator just slides straight back in. What I did do is just put some silicone lube on the rubber runners and also on the car, makes it slide in much easier. I warn you now, it is incredibly easy to cross the threads on this lower fitting, because sometimes the pipes do not go in square. So do not rush. Whatever you do, make sure the fitting is lined up. Otherwise you will seriously regret it if you strip that across that thread. Top bolt tends to be much easier to line up. Once again, make sure you've got 2 spanners on. You'll have lost some oil when undoing the oil pipe, so don't forget to check your dipstick and top up with oil if need be. We use the Castrol 2050, but you may have some oil left over which you can use. Just another point, if you've ever wondered why after an oil change your oil still looks black, it is because when people change the oil, they very rarely drain the oil out of the oil cooler, which you could see from the video before was very black. So if you leave that oil in there and you put fresh oil in your engine, as it mixes around, it's going to get black again as it mixes with this. So if you want to do an oil change properly, the way to do it is ideally to drain the oil cooler too. When you're coming to put the hoses back on, put this one on first, because the hose clip tends to be right in the way of this thing here. If you put this one on first, very difficult to tighten that one. This radiator clip in here is really fiddly. The easiest way to do it is to put the clip in through this hole here, kind of put 2 fingers in and try and pull the clip down with one hand, and then with the other hand wedge something like a screwdriver or something to push it down, give yourself extra leverage. Once you've put everything together, you're going to want to get all the air out of the radiator, and the way to do this is preferably to have your car pointed upwards at the front, so you can park it on a steep hill or just drive it up onto bricks. And you're going to run the engine up to temperature with the cap off and the heater blowers on, and as the engine warms up, the fluid is going to expand. So whatever you do, do not fill that all the way to the top and then turn the engine on, because you'll have coolant going everywhere. You just want to have about 1 centimetre or 2 in the bottom, and you'll see it rising up, and every now and again you'll see air bubbles bubbling out, and then the level will drop sharply and you can top it up. So do not overfill that if you do not want to get coolant everywhere. And then after you've driven the car around for a little bit, you may find that you need to come back and top that up some more. If you're wondering what sort of coolant to use, we use this Prestone stuff concentrate. They also do ready mixed. Now this comes out green. When you add it to pink coolant, it won't change the color of your pink coolant. You can add this to any coolant, any engine, and it'll give the protection you need for an aluminium block. I'm going to leave this video here and just leave a link to where we got the water pump from and the cheapest place to get coolant. And we're going to make the most of the sunny day and just test drive this car. And in the next video, we're going to be picking up a gold parts car, which I think is probably the rustiest SL I've ever seen in my life, but hopefully it'll have the parts that we need just so we can start putting back together this project here, which is basically just a painted shell with a engine in it that's not connected to anything, and a gearbox that isn't correct for the car. It's got the wrong seats, the wrong everything in it, that car. So that is going to take us some time to put back together, and that's going to be the subject of the series of next videos that we do. We got our Feby water pump number 01356 for just $26.99 delivered, exceptionally cheap from these guys here, MJD128 on eBay. They're also known as Rice Rocket, and I'd find that those guys often have Feby parts cheaper than anybody else, so definitely worth checking them out. The place to get the Prestone concentrate is in the UK is Euro Car Parts, £18.99. If they don't have any, you can get some from GSF, German, Swedish, French car parts. It's about £19.99. You can also get the ready mix stuff from places like Toolstation, but it works out just about twice as expensive. When you're mixing this up in the UK, where we're not talking about sub-zero temperatures, it's mixed in a 1-to-1 ratio, but there are instructions on the back for colder climates.